course, the other thing you get to do at a convention is roll out your vice presidential candidate, which in this case was J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
I know him a little bit.
What do you think of him?
Look, we're from the same generation. We're both from the Midwest, different parts of the Midwest.
Right.
I know a lot of guys like J.D. Vance. I run into a lot of guys like him. Not so much when I was growing up in Indiana.
Thiel.
But,
Peter Thiel is his big backer.
yeah, for sure. And
Okay, if people don't know who that is, he started PayPal.
Yeah.
He's gay. He's a billionaire. I mean, I've had a couple of people who knew you were coming on this week said, ask Pete what he thinks about Peter Thiel being so in love with J.D. Vance, who is flatly against gay marriage.
Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. If you're tired of the political circus and just want someone to call out the hypocrisy with a bit of common sense and a dash of sarcasm, you're in the right place. So let's talk about something that went down on real time with Bill Maher, because when Pete Buttigieg sits across from Bill and starts unpacking the J.D. Vance situation, you already know we're not getting fluff, we're getting fire. Now the whole convo zeroes in on the kind of political flip-flopping that would make a gymnast jealous. We're talking about how elites like billionaire Peter Thiel and power-hungry ladder climbers like J.D. Vance are trading principles for influence like it's Black Friday in the Senate. What do you get when you mix ambition, hypocrisy, and a Republican Party built on vibes and vibes alone? Buckle up because Pete holds nothing back. Let's break it down.
of course, the other thing you get to do at a convention is roll out your vice presidential candidate, which in this case was J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
I know him a little bit.
What do you think of him?
Look, we're from the same generation. We're both from the Midwest, different parts of the Midwest.
Right.
I know a lot of guys like J.D. Vance. I run into a lot of guys like him. Not so much when I was growing up in Indiana.
Thiel. Peter Thiel is his big backer.
Yeah, for sure. And
Okay, if people don't know who that is, he started PayPal.
Yeah.
He's gay. He's a billionaire. I mean, I've had a couple of people who knew you were coming on this week said, ask Pete what he thinks about Peter Thiel being so in love with J.D. Vance, who is flatly against gay marriage.
So I think it's a profound contradiction, but maybe it's not that complicated. I know there are a lot of folks who say, what's going on with some of these Silicon Valley folks veering into Trump world with J.D. Vance and backing Trump? What are they thinking? Silicon Valley is supposed to be, they're supposed to care about climate. They're supposed to be, I don't know, pro-science and rational and libertarians. So normally libertarians don't like authoritarians. What's up with that? I think it's actually, we've made it way too complicated. It's super simple. These are very rich men who have decided to back the Republican Party that tends to do good things for very rich men.
Couldn't agree more.
And by the way, that's kind of what you're getting with. That's kind of what you're getting with JD.
All right, y'all, let's dive into one of the wildest contradictions in the modern political landscape. Peter Thiel backing J.D. Vance. I mean, seriously? Here's a billionaire tech genius, openly gay, hailing from a world where science, innovation, and libertarian ideals are supposed to reign supreme. And what does he do? He throws his full support behind a guy like J.D. Vance, the poster child for Trumpism. A dude who is literally on record opposing gay marriage and parroting the populist culture war nonsense like it's gospel. Now Pete Buttigieg, cool as ever, cuts right through the noise and says what we're all thinking. This isn't about ideology, it's about money. These guys don't care about values. They care about keeping the tax loopholes wide open and making sure their portfolios stay fat. And honestly, Pete nails it with this line. These are very rich men who have decided to back the Republican Party that tends to do good things for very rich men. Gone. That's the quote right there. It's not about freedom or family or any of the talking points they love to shove in our faces. It's about raw, unfiltered self-interest. So the next time someone tries to sell you the principled billionaire libertarian fantasy, just remember, if the tax breaks are sweet enough, they'll kiss the ring of whoever's holding power, even if that ring's drenched in MAGA Kool-Aid.
I knew a lot of people like him when I got to Harvard. I found a lot of people like him who would say whatever they needed to get ahead. And 5 years ago, that seemed like being the anti-Trump Republican, so that's what he was. Talked about how he was unfit, how he was cynical, called him an opioid, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a person, but definitely a really... But I mean, for somebody whose identity is that they're connected to Appalachia, which has an opioid crisis, that really is the darkest thing you could possibly say about Donald Trump. at least in public, but behind the scenes, apparently he's actually calling him Hitler, right?
Pete Buttigieg absolutely dragged J.D. Vance for building his whole brand on being the voice of Appalachian authenticity, only to throw it under the nearest billionaire-funded campaign bus. This guy Vance, wrote Hillbilly Elegy, positioned himself as the voice of the forgotten working class, the guy who gets small-town pain, addiction, and poverty. But the second he sniffs power, suddenly he's cozying up to Silicon Valley oligarchs and MAGA extremists faster than you can say, Fox News primetime. And here's where it gets real dark. Vance once compared Trump to an opioid. Think about that. He literally said Trump was like a drug ravaging the very people he claimed to represent, his own Appalachian community. I mean, that's not just criticism. That's a nuclear-level metaphor when you consider the opioid crisis has destroyed lives in those very towns. And yet, guess who's on stage now singing Trump's praises like it's a campaign karaoke night? It's cynical. It's cynical. It's hollow. And Pete's point is crystal clear. Vance isn't representing Appalachia anymore. He's representing ambition. Pure, uncut political ambition. So yeah, next time J.D. Vance starts talking about the people, just remember, he once compared his new boss to heroin. And now he's hooked.
Seriously, 5 years later, the way he gets ahead is that he's the greatest guy since sliced bread. And I actually watched this exact same process with somebody else I got to know in my days in the Midwest, which was my former governor, Mike Pence, who I watched start out as an evangelical Christian who cared about rectitude and family values, and then get on board with a guy who was mixed up with a porn star, make excuses for him, so that he could have power. And then he did. He got 4 glorious years, I guess, as Vice President of the United States. And it ended on the west front of the Capitol with Trump supporters proposing that he be hanged for using the one shred of integrity he still had to stand up to an attempt to overthrow the government.
Right.
So I guess, maybe not as a politician, but as a human being, what I'll say is that I hope things work out a little bit better for J.D. Vance than they did for Mike Pence.
Let's get into the delicious hypocrisy stew. That is the modern evangelical conservative movement, starring none other than Mike Pence and his spiritual twin in ambition, J.D. Vance. Pete Buttigieg lays it out plain. These guys love to wrap themselves in the Bible, family values and moral purity, until it gets in the way of power. Then suddenly, character is just a cute word you read in Sunday school. Mike Pence started as the ultimate evangelical poster boy, all about integrity, righteousness, and virtue. And then came Trump, a guy who made hush money payments to a porn star. And what did Pence do? He bowed his head and played the loyal servant for 4 long years. And how did that loyalty end? With a mob of Trump supporters chanting for his head on January 6th. Literally. Mike Pence. That was the thank you note. And now here comes J.D. Vance, following the same path, tossing out his principles like expired coupons, cozying up to Trump, hoping that the crown of power is worth the price. But Pete's message is brutal and on point. Aligning with Trump might win you some short-term power, but the cost is steep, morally, personally, maybe even physically. Just ask Mike Pence. Pete Buttigieg calls it like it is. Vance is the kind of dude who'll say whatever it takes to climb the ladder. 5 years ago, he was throwing shade at Trump, calling him unfit, cynical. He even compared him to an opioid, for crying out loud. And now, Trump's apparently the second coming of Ronald Reagan in his eyes. The flip is so shameless, you'd think it came with a free MAGA hat and a loyalty pledge. But Pete doesn't stop there. He compares Vance's arc to good old Mike Pence, another Midwestern man of principle who traded values for a seat at the big boy table, only to end up with a mob chanting to hang him. So yeah, J.D. Vance is less about convictions and more about convenience. 1 minute he's the anti-Trump truth teller, next minute he's the hype man. And Pete's, quote, nails it. 5 years ago that seemed like being the anti-Trump Republican. Now he's the greatest guy since sliced bread. J.D. didn't evolve. He sold out. He wraps up his whole takedown of J.D. Vance with this perfectly polished line, "I hope things work out a little better for J.D. Vance than they did for Mike Pence." That's not just a joke, that's a warning shot in a tuxedo. Keep dancing with Trump, and you might end up dangling like Pence, metaphorically, or, almost literally, considering how January 6th went down. It's that classic Pete move, smiling while tossing a grenade. He's not just being witty, he's laying out a brutal truth. When you sell your soul for power, don't be surprised when the devil wants a refund. So yeah, JD might want to keep one eye on the rearview mirror. That political ride he hitched has a nasty habit of running over its passengers. If you enjoyed this deep dive into political fakery, billionaire hypocrisy and the art of the sellout, smash that like button, drop a comment below, and let me know what you think about the rise of JD Vance and the fall of basic integrity in politics. And hey, if you want more no-nonsense, straight-shooting takes like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you never miss a rant, a roast, or a reality check. Thanks for watching, stay sharp, and I'll catch you in the next one.